The Trumpet Daily with Stephen Flurry.
Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to the Trumpet Daily radio show. We're coming to you live from a nice, comfortable hotel in Detroit, Michigan. We're in the midst of a two-day PAC event here in Detroit. As I mentioned last week, after this, we'll be heading down to Cincinnati, Ohio for a one-night event tomorrow evening. So we've got a little bit of time today to process everything from last night. We had about 130 people for the PAC here in Detroit for the first night, and we were coming in, we were projecting 125, so it was right around where we were anticipating, and of that number, 82 people were non-members, and then the rest were coming from actually quite a distance, most of them, 2-3 hours away, because we don't have too many PCG members right in the Detroit metro area. I think we have a small congregation that meets just outside of Detroit, but outside of that, we really are in need of some growth in this part of the world. So hopefully what we talked about last night will serve as motivation for most of them, if not all of them, to return this evening. I know there's quite a few of our members that came from a long distance that won't be coming back tonight, so it'll probably be a much smaller group. At least as far as the church membership is concerned. But hopefully for those that did make it, we had one that I talked to that came from 8 hours away, and he's actually staying the night so that he can attend tonight as well. So we've got lots to get to as we roll through the content for today's program. As per usual, we've put together a montage of feedback coming from mostly non-members last night. I think this one is going to be about 5 minutes in length, so a little bit longer than usual. So you'll want to stay tuned to the entirety of the program to get the feedback from here in Detroit. And also we have a special segment that Joel Hilliker put together. He's traveling with us this time for the 3 days in Detroit and Cincinnati. And he's put together a segment that basically just encapsulates his impressions and thoughts on the trip thus far. He was busy with the recorder yesterday and has also got some commentary that he's put together in addition to some of the sounds from the trip. So we'll play that. We'll see how it goes with my news coverage here in just a moment, but hopefully we can get to that maybe in the middle of the program. That's a longer segment. Again, Mr. Hilliker's impressions on the PAC event thus far. And speaking of Mr. Hilliker, he's going to be subbing in on tomorrow's program, again, right here in Detroit. We'll be here tomorrow morning before we catch our flight back to or down to Cincinnati. So we'll have one more live broadcast from the hotel here in Detroit. And Mr. Hilliker plans to talk about, in fact, he plans to talk about this once great American city, the city of Detroit. It really does tell a uniquely American story, the story of prosperity and industrial power, and yet also racial division, economic turmoil and collapse. That was not that long ago, just a few years ago. And now Detroit's experiencing something of a resurgence. So he'll have much more to say on that subject tomorrow morning or tomorrow evening, wherever it is that you listen to the program from. You can expect to hear Mr. Hilliker on tomorrow's Trumpet Daily radio show. Well, as far as last night is concerned, I talked about and we'll spend some more time on this as we draw near to the anniversary, but we're coming up to the 80th anniversary of the start of World War II. That was on September the 1st, 1939, when Adolf Hitler's Nazi Germany launched an attack on neighboring Poland, which triggered the worst ever war in human history. And last night at the PAC, what I did was I went through a lot of the events leading up to the start of World War II and how that there were signs all along the way and that it could have been stopped before it ever got started if the Allies would have just stood up against Adolf Hitler, whether it was at the Rhineland or in Austria or later Czechoslovakia. Of course, there was the sellout in Munich, basically sacrificing Czechoslovakia to the wolves in hopes of obtaining peace, just to get a piece of paper that said peace in our time, or words to that effect. Who can forget what Neville Chamberlain said on coming back to London after meeting with Hitler in Munich, and all the cheering, the jubilation, the excitement surrounding that event. Of course, Winston Churchill, said that you can't blame the people of Britain. They've been through so much with World War I fresh on their minds. You can see why they were hopeful for peace. But Churchill went on to say that they should also know the truth. They should know what's happened in the last few years. They should know that as we've downsized our military, here Adolf Hitler's been building an air force, a military machine. He's drafting the young Germans into the army. He was preparing for war, even as the people of Britain were told that war would never come. Well, it did come on September 1st, 1939. As I say, we're coming up to the 80th anniversary of that date, so we'll probably have, I'm not sure if September 1st is on a weekday or not, but we'll certainly have a lot more to say on that as we approach that anniversary. In any event, what I tried to emphasize last night was the warning, the watchman warning of Winston Churchill, and how that he stood alone. He stood up and told the truth when everyone else was out there telling lies. Churchill was right when everyone else was wrong. It says in my father's booklet, Winston S. Churchill, the Watchman, Churchill was great enough to rise above the press, the educational institutions of the day, and politics. And then he asked, do we have any such leaders today? We really don't. Certainly not in the political sphere. There is a watchman work, for sure. There is a watchman today, but it's one God has raised up. It's not one that the people have selected, as it says there in Ezekiel 33, verses 1 through 6. I referred again to that booklet multiple times last night, Winston S. Churchill, The Watchman. It's a powerful little booklet, a good bit of it based upon Martin Gilbert's 5th volume in the series on Churchill, and that volume's titled Churchill, the Prophet of Truth. Winston S. Churchill, the Prophet of Truth. That's the way Martin Gilbert described him. He was a prophet. He proclaimed things that were about to happen, and no one else saw it coming. Or if they did, they were in denial. Churchill saw it. He proclaimed it. And he said when Chamberlain came back from Munich holding that piece of paper, he got up before Parliament and to paraphrase, he said, well, I'm going to say what no one else will say. We have sustained an unmitigated defeat. What a prophet of truth he was. It's exciting, really. Starting this new course at Armstrong College, the survey of Winston S. Churchill. I think Brad McDonald has the lecture today, but just immersing ourselves into some of these works. My father's booklet, by the way, even though it's only 70 pages or so, it really does. I think it really does summarize perfectly the problem with man and with human nature leading up to World War II. It's a great place to start if you're looking to delve into that history. Added to that, of course, you've got William Manchester, the 2 volumes that I mentioned last week, and even that one by Martin Gilbert as well. So we'll look forward to getting into that history more, particularly as we come up to that 80th anniversary of the start of the Second World War. Well, the New York Times had a town hall style staff meeting that was leaked last week, and Byron York has a good article on that, which we'll come to here in just a second. But most of the meeting was about the New York Times going forward over the next 2 years, what they plan to cover and how they plan to cover it, particularly as we come up to the 2020 elections next November. But what was really revealing about these leaks and about what was discussed in that town hall style meeting was what not just the staff were saying about the approach to many of their stories or their coverage, but even the executive editor, Dean Beckett. I'll just give you a little bit from that transcript. This is something that Ted Cruz said that we ought to read the entirety of. Sam skimmed through it the other day. But notice what this staffer asked in that meeting. He said, I have another question about racism. I'm wondering to what extent you think that the fact of racism and white supremacy being sort of the foundation of this country, he's talking about America, the foundation of this country, should play in our reporting, just because it feels to me like it should be a starting point. It says, like these conversations about what is racist and what isn't racist, I just feel like racism is in everything. This is a New York Times staffer saying that racism is in everything. It should be considered in our science reporting, in our culture reporting, in our national reporting. And so to me, it's less about the individual instances of racism and sort of how we're thinking about racism and white supremacy as the foundation of all the systems in the country. This is the New York Times, the paper of record. This is the newspaper that the news media, the TV media rely upon, basically for their playbook. This is what they use for their evening reporting. They rely upon the New York Times. So here's this staffer saying, look, this is the story of America, is the story of racism and white supremacy. And then this was the executive editor's response, Dean Beckett. He said, we built our newsroom to cover one story, and we did it truly well. Now, he's talking, I skipped a little bit of the quote, but he's talking about the last couple of years and how that the New York Times built the newsroom to cover one story, and that would be Russian collusion. And then when the Mueller report came out, well, that one collapsed. the whole way they built their newsroom, it just came tumbling down once the Mueller report came out earlier this week. And so here's what Beckett says. Now we have to regroup and shift resources and emphasis to take on a different story. He says, I'd love your help with that. This one is a story about what it means to be an American in 2019. It's a story that requires deep investigation into people who peddle hatred, but it's also a story that requires imaginative use of all our muscles to write about race and class in a deeper way than we have in years. It says in the coming weeks, we'll be assigning some new people to politics who can offer different ways of looking at the world. We'll also ask reporters to write more deeply about the country, race, and other divisions. So as I said, Ted Cruz, he's going through this transcript. Sorry, bumped the table here. We're in tight quarters this morning, so bear with us. And Josh is basically breathing down my neck. Literally, he's right next to me, 2 inches away. Maybe not that close, but he's closer than usual. So this is a nice, intimate gathering. We also have Lasky Hart here. He's from our Canadian office. He's getting some nice footage for our Behind the Work film. So there's always something new going on. Ted Cruz tweeted this. He said, if you care about journalism or the First Amendment, read the transcript. The editor says, in effect, for 2 years we covered Russia, Russia, Russia. Facts be damned. Now we'll scream racism, racism, racism for 18 months. And the rest of the media will follow us. And then Ted Cruz says, that's not journalism. That's not journalism. That's an agenda. That's an agenda. And as he rightly points out, everyone's just going to follow right along. Now let me shift gears here to Byron York. This was his take on that transcript that was leaked last week. The new goal for the New York Times, reframe American history and then target Trump too. Byron York says perhaps when you think of the founding of the United States, you think of the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, the Federalist Papers. Now the New York Times wants to reframe your understanding of the nation's founding. So this is not some, crazy left-wing blog we're talking about. We're talking about the New York Times York says in the Times view, which it hopes to make the view of millions of Americans, the country was actually founded in 1619. Now listen to this. 1619, when the first Africans were brought to North America, to Virginia, to be sold as slaves. So the founding of America, it's not the Declaration of Independence. It's not the Constitution or the Bill of Rights. It's 1619, and of course they're going to be playing up this date because we're at the 400th anniversary of that event. The time when the first Africans were brought to North America to be sold as slaves. It says this year marks the 400th anniversary of that event, and the Times has created something called the 1619 Project. This is what the paper hopes the project will accomplish. This is quoting the Times now. It aims to reframe the country's history. This is what the Times is intent on doing. It wants to reframe America's history, understanding 1619 as our true founding, and placing the consequences of slavery and the contributions of black Americans at the very center of the story we tell ourselves about who we are. It says another more concise statement from the Times. The goal of the 1619 Project is to reframe American history. Byron York then says the basic thrust of this project is that everything in American history is explained by slavery and race. So everything is explained by slavery and race. When I was reading this story this morning, Sam pulled this information together, but it made me think, you remember all of the criticism and rebuke that President Trump received for his comments following the tragedy at Charlottesville and that contentious press conference, going back and forth, talking about, this and that, and the white supremacists, and the protesting and the statues coming down, and of course then people following that event twisting his words, trying to make it seem like that he was saying that there were very good people in the KKK or the white supremacist groups, which he didn't say at all. But within that press conference, I guess you got this clip, right? Clip 2? Yep. All right. This is what he said regarding the changing of the history. This was where he was saying, okay, well, if you're going to pull down the statue of Robert E. Lee, then where does it stop? Here's clip 2.
You had people in that group that were there to protest the taking down of, to them, a very, very important statue and the renaming of a park from Robert E. Lee to another name.
Wait, Robert E. Lee are not the same.
No, George Washington was a slave owner. Was George Washington a slave owner? So will George Washington now lose his status? Are we going to take down, are we going to take down statues to George Washington? How about Thomas Jefferson? What do you think of Thomas Jefferson? You like him? Okay, good. Are we going to take down the statue? Because he was a major slave owner. Now we're going to take down his statue. So you know what? It's fine. You're changing history. You're changing culture.
That's President Trump from 2017, I guess it was, just a couple of years ago. And, of course, when he made those comments, besides the criticism that he took for other statements in the press conference, people came out and said, well, now, look, it's just Robert E. Lee. We're not talking about Jefferson or Washington. But that's President Trump basically saying, look, everything now is going to be explained by slavery and race. He knew where this was headed. And that's exactly where we are. That's what the New York Times is now saying. It's all got to be explained this way. And like the president said there at the last bit of that clip, you're changing history, you're changing culture. Byron York says the message is woven throughout the first publication of the project, an entire edition of the Times Magazine. It begins with an overview of race in America. Our democracy's founding ideals were false when they were written. Black Americans have fought to make them true. That's written by a New York Times writer. Listen to some of the subjects that they're going to be working on in the weeks and months ahead. The essays go on to cover the economy. If you want to understand the brutality of American capitalism, you have to start on the plantation. That's one of the selections. It's on the food we eat. And here's a sampling. The sugar that saturates the American diet has a barbaric history as the white gold that fueled slavery. Another one, the nation's physical health. Why doesn't the United States have universal health care? The answer begins with policies enacted after the Civil War. And then politics. It says America holds on to an undemocratic assumption from its founding that some people deserve more power than others. These are all selections from the New York Times. This is all what they're working on. Everything. It's like that staffer got up and said. It's not just something that, one incident here or there. It's every story. One on Daily Life, it says, what does a traffic jam in Atlanta have to do with segregation? Quite a lot, says the New York Times. It says the Times, this is Byron York, the Times promises more 1619 project stories in the future, not just in the paper's news sections, but in the business, sports, travel, and other sections. The Times' popular podcast, The Daily, will also devote time to it. So literally everything that's going to be discussed or covered or written about, it's going to come from this angle. This is the agenda. And of course, there's other news organizations that are already running with this. CNN had a story recently about how that the El Paso shooting is a modern-day lynching. So they're going on and on about the spread of white supremacism, and you saw last week, or maybe it was the week before, about how they reacted to Tucker Carlson, calling this the latest hoax. And listen, really, the leaks coming out of the New York Times, they say as much. They're basically saying this is our agenda now that the Russia story didn't work. And so they're going to be hunting, looking for anything that they can write about race, anything that they can write to divide the country. Byron York says here, but the project with the aim of reframing U.S. history has to be more than a bunch of articles and podcasts. A major goal of the 1619 project is to take the reframing message to schools. The Times has joined an organization called the Pulitzer Center, which, it should be noted, is not the organization that hands out the Pulitzer Prize, to create a 1619 project curriculum. Here you will find reading guides, activities, and other resources to bring the 1619 project into your classroom, the center says. So the paper also wants to reach into schools itself. Byron York brings out. It quotes a few people in that section, but let me just get more toward the conclusion. This is where York talks about the exchange that Baquette had with the staffer in this town hall. Well, I think I already kind of covered that. In any event, here's another statement from the executive editor at the New York Times. He says, I mean, the vision for coverage for the next 2 years is what I talked about earlier. How do we cover a guy who makes, this is where it pertains to President Trump, how do we cover a guy who makes these kinds of remarks? How do we cover the world's reaction to him? How do we do that while continuing to cover his policies? How do we cover America that's become so divided by Donald Trump? So he's the problem. That's what the New York Times has concluded, which is not necessarily a surprise, but how revealing it is to get the leaks from this town hall where they're basically saying our whole newsroom was devoted to Russia for 2 years. That was the focus. That's what we concentrated on. And now it didn't work out, so we have to adapt, we have to adjust. We have to come up with something new. And they've come up with it. Here's how York concludes his piece. So, the New York Times has 2 big plans. One would be big enough to focus on the universe of racism accusations that increasingly surround the president at a time when he just happens to be running for re-election. But the other is even bigger, to reframe American history in accordance with the values of the New York Times editors. It's an extraordinarily ambitious undertaking for people in what used to be known more simply as the news business. It's just like Ted Cruz said, this is not journalism. This is a radical left-wing agenda, and it's building and building and building toward an explosion of violence. Both sides, they're digging in their heels. Look at the pictures that came out of Portland over the weekend, as you had on the one hand Antifa in their black helmets and such, and then you had these big white nationalists. I'm sure a lot of them are Trump supporters. And again, I know the media is going to do what they can to try to directly connect Donald Trump to these groups. But you have Antifa, and then you have these other groups that are rising in defense of America, and they're waving their U.S. flags and so on. Even the campaign last week, and again, I want to make sure to draw a distinction between these white nationalist groups, which the president has come out and criticized over and over again, and then just your typical Trump supporters, which there's thousands and thousands of them. You saw from the Manchester rally in New Hampshire last week. I think it was something like 11,700 people that showed up. They set a record for this arena in New Hampshire, and there were thousands and thousands. I think it was estimated that maybe 8,000 people were watching the event outside. This is just a regular old Keep America Great rally, and people are coming in, and you can imagine all of the security. There's some reports saying that you have to wait all day, hours and hours, just to try to get into an event. And a lot of people do it, and there's nothing like it. There's no one on the Democrat side drawing these kinds of crowds. I have an article here that says some have to get in line 36 hours ahead of time. Imagine, they get all this criticism, the news media hate them, and yet still they turn up in droves, even in a state like New Hampshire. It's a pretty amazing story. And, of course, the left, the Democrats, they're panicking. They're doing anything that they can to try to slander this president. And if it's not racism, there's ones like Bill Maher that are out there hoping and hoping and hoping we'll come upon a recession so that he'll be voted out of office. This was from Bill Maher's program on Friday evening, clip 1.
Keep touching
Well,
the
you
hot
should
stove.
wish for a recession, because that will definitely get him
really-
unelected.
Okay, but Bill, you don't really want a recession.
I really do.
You're gonna knock
We
a
have
lot of-
survived many recessions. We can't survive another Donald Trump
You're going to
term.
knock lower middle income people out of work. You really don't.
I do.
You didn't at the ballot box and you didn't intellectual marketplace of
Okay.
ideas.
So
You don't want to knock those people out of work. But to Tom's point, the tariff,
I don't want to.
tariff is actually paid by
we
the
have to
people.
make
saying short-term pain.
Remember, everybody,
might be better
yes,
than
tariff is a
long-term
right.
regressive
You have
tax.
to
Constitution.
Thank you very much.
That's a roundtable last week, I guess Friday night, from Bill Maher's show, where he's saying we have to hope for a recession so that we can get him out of office. And there's been a lot of headlines where they maybe haven't come out and editorialized quite like Maher did right there, but there's a lot of headlines hopefully reporting that, well, we must be taking a significant downturn now. Just from the last, there's an article that just highlights a number of headlines, but I don't want to spend too much time on this because I do want to reserve some time for the special segment that we have coming up, and that's from Joel Hilliker. He's recorded some impressions, even as he's been here in Detroit, from the PAC trips, from the PAC event here in Detroit. And when we come back, we'll be playing his segment from here in Detroit about the personal appearance campaigns. You're listening to Stephen Flurry, and this is the Trumpet Daily radio show. If you'd like to submit feedback to the program, you can send comments to td@kpcg.fm. We'll be right back.
This is KPCG FM, and this is the Trumpet Daily. Freedom is one of the most sought-after ideals in human history. Man's search for freedom has taken him into the fiercest of protests, struggles, revolutions, civil wars, and even world wars. Today, In the midst of free societies, many continue to fight for what they perceive as ever greater freedoms. And yet, many of these same people are actively fighting against law. Few people understand that this war against law actually undermines true freedom. To learn more, request Gerald Flurry's booklet, No Freedom Without Law. In this free booklet, you will see what the Bible says about the latter-day spirit of rebellion and lawlessness that is now so common in our nations today. Also request America Under Attack. In this booklet, you will learn more about the spirit behind this attack on law. You'll see where this is leading. Both booklets are offered freely at no cost or obligation to you. Request No Freedom Without Law and America Under Attack. Email your request to td@kpcg.fm or visit thetrumpet.com. The Trumpet Daily.
It's early Sunday morning, and our adventure is already beginning. My wife and I are picking up my sister and her husband and a couple of flight attendants, one of whom happens to be my daughter. And we're off to Will Rogers World Airport through the back door. Everyone is enthusiastic, but I think my eagerness might be a notch or two or three on the higher end of the dial because it's my first opportunity in over 20 years to attend a personal appearance campaign. I attended a 2-night campaign given by Gerald Flurry in Dallas, Texas, January 24th and 25th, 1999. That was 7,510 days ago. On top of that, it's the first time I can remember getting on a plane without having to go through TSA. We arrive at a small gate on the east side of the airport. It's 7:42. Our flight is scheduled to leave in 18 minutes. Customarily, if my flight were leaving at this time, I'd have been wandering the corridors of Will Rogers for nearly an hour by now, munching on a breakfast sandwich from Tucker's. But this morning, the gate opens and we drive straight over to our airplane. Today we're flying the N127 Royal Ride. We're raising the ruins on the Gulfstream G450. The flight crew is there to greet us. The luggage and equipment go straight into the back of the jet. We ascend into the plane. We take our seats, facing each other over a small conference table. The pilots climb into the cockpit. And suddenly, I realize my intense curiosity whether we'll have to watch a demonstration on how to buckle our seatbelts. The refreshing answer is no. We taxi to the runway. At 8 o'clock on the dot, we are off. Once we reach altitude, our flight attendants serve a lovely hot breakfast made by our kitchen crew back in Edmond. While the plane is climbing, it's a little bumpy, but it dawns on me in the middle of conversation over breakfast that I hardly even realize we're in an airplane anymore. At one point, we're flying at 43,000 feet, and the ride is smoother than silk sheets. I'm looking out the window, floating in wispy heights of atmosphere, seeing the curvature of the earth and the deep blue above, and I imagine being an astronaut. It feels like we just sat down and we're already circling the airport at our destination, Detroit, Michigan. I'm sitting at a desk, typing on my laptop. Suddenly, the plane jostles as the wheels touch the ground, and I realized I was able to keep working right through the landing and continue even as we taxi to our gate. Soon we've stopped, and we're deplaning, And there to meet us with cars waiting are two of our ministers, Cal Culpepper and Victor Vigil, and a staff member from our Canada office, Tyrell Schloda. Just 131 minutes ago, we were 994 miles away in Oklahoma City. And here, there's no waiting, no trundling through the airport, no lingering in baggage claim, no hike to the parking garage. We shift supplies and luggage from plane to cars, and we speed off to the city. We have a short 24-minute shuttle, and we're at the venue. The hotel lobby is peppered with our church members. After some enthusiastic family reunion-like greetings and hugs, it's down to business. Off to the conference room for a department head meeting with the crew manning the campaign. There are 26 people present: the ministers, the people in charge of hospitality, the auditorium, shipping and receiving, audiovisual and lighting, security, and a few other helpers. Mr. Culpepper gives a stirring address about just how important these campaigns are, how God is using them to help reach people in ways that could change lives, and the role that each volunteer has in representing God. Afterward, Mr. Vigil discusses some of the details of the individual responsibilities. Soon, everyone is dismissed, and the room is quickly transformed into its final form, with signs, tables, refreshments, literature, and other details assembled and placed. Josh Sloan is floating around the room with cables sheathing his arms, assembling speakers and monitors, and snapping his fingers in front of microphones. One member is steaming the wrinkles out of the wine-colored trumpet logo backdrop behind the speaker's stand. This is my first rodeo, but it's the 10th PAC just this summer, and the organizers have turned it into a finely regulated operation. I feel like I'm watching a skilled orchestra in its final rehearsal. The doors open 1 hour before the meeting begins, and the atmosphere is crackling with energy. Around the room, excited clusters of conversations are happening. Attendees begin filtering in. Old, young, all shapes, all sizes and colors, some in suits and dresses, others in dress shirts and trousers, blouses and skirts, others in tattered jeans, baseball caps, tank tops, and shorts. They're welcomed at the door and handed a brochure, Trumpet Lecture Series. They wander the room, get a cup of coffee, peruse the literature table, talk among themselves. One woman walks in the door, sees a sign-up list for a follow-up Bible study for the following week, and signs it immediately. I'm approached by a man who has tears in his eyes. He tells me he's been reading the trumpet and our literature for 8 years and is extremely enthusiastic about all that he's learning. He picked it up in a dentist's office, and it took his life in an altogether new direction. He began keeping the Sabbath. He abandoned self-destructive habits. He wants to be baptized. He's counseling with a PCG minister. As he speaks, he catches a glimpse in the corner of his eye of Mr. Flurry arriving at the door of the ballroom, and he grows even more enthusiastic. Our conversation is cut short by Mr. Culpepper bringing the meeting to order, and the room quiets down. The venue is quite full. Every row of seats has several people. Probably 70% of the chairs are occupied by an individual, a listener, a reader who accepted an invitation to hear this message, who requested a ticket, who traveled the streets of Detroit and surrounding cities, some from 15 minutes away, others from 2, 3, even 8 hours drive. Of the 160 invitations accepted, 82 followed up and did whatever they needed to be in this room at this moment. Mr. Culpepper welcomes everyone. He lets them know about the Bible study next Sunday and then introduces a short video. A large screen gives an overview of urgent world events and explains how Gerald Flurry and the work are publicizing a message of how these events are leading to the time of trouble prophesied to immediately precede the second coming of Jesus Christ. And then Stephen Flurry takes the stage and begins his address. He starts describing the period leading up to the last World War, how delusional the press was, how deceived the politicians were, how convinced they were there was nothing to fear, yet they were mere months, even days away from an intercontinental conflagration that would snuff out some 60 million lives. You could get the truth during the 1930s, but you had to search for it. He then makes explicit the relevance of this history from nearly 8 decades ago.
Now listen, the reason I'm bringing this up is because history is going to repeat itself.
2 rows in front of me, a man in a baseball cap and black t-shirt nods his head vigorously. Another man with silver hair sits back in his chair, arms crossed, stroking his chin, perhaps skeptically, perhaps thoughtfully. Throughout his address, after particularly strong points, little noises of assent float up from among the crowd. Mr. Flurry speaks to his listeners comfortably, directly. For long stretches, he looks up from his notes and stares out at them earnestly and talks to them with compassion, with authority, with power.
And that's what it's saying here. When this comes to pass, lo, it will come, God says. When it does, then shall they know that a prophet was among them.
He's challenging them to recognize the real danger of these times and how close we are to entering an even worse global Holocaust. He's challenging them to act, to do something with the truth they understand. You hear it indirectly and directly in every word. We've traveled here to speak to you face to face. We've rented this facility. We're offering you a table full of free literature. Take as much as you want. Our ministers are here to answer your questions. We want to speak with you. You can hear God. You can hear His Spirit, His voice echoing in the room and filling their ears. I am here. My arms are open. I want to teach you. I want to help you. I want to protect you and save you. If you've been delaying, if you've been sitting on the fence or making excuses, I haven't given up on you. But it is time to act, to sit in this room, to survey the audience, to think of these individuals in whose lives God is planting seeds and nurturing growth and personally appealing to, is poignant and intense and stirring and wonderful. Not one person leaves. Every individual who came stays to the last word. And Mr. Flurry concludes with a strong appeal to stay for as long as they would like, to speak with the ministers, to take as much literature as they want, and to return for a second lecture tomorrow. As soon as his address ends, the room fills with conversation. Every minister is approached by multiple people. I'm immediately caught up in a series of discussions with people expressing gratitude about the trumpet, asking questions about doctrines, detailing circumstances in their lives, one after another after another. A man who was in the Worldwide Church of God for a short time back in 1986 and fell away. A 20-year-old woman who just received a Bible as a gift and is about to start the Herbert Armstrong Correspondence Course. A man who's proving the truth about the identity of the end-time Elijah. A woman who wants to know the main differences between the PCG and another church that came out of the WCG. 2 men who only heard tonight that Mr. Armstrong's successors betrayed him. The conversations continue for an hour and a half. It's nearly 2 hours before the last non-member files out of the room. There are nearly 20 of us left, charged up, happy, and thankful at having had the opportunity to be witnesses for God and witnesses of all that God has done this day.
Yeah, thanks to Mr. Hilliker for recording his impressions late last night with the help of some of the guys here on the staff. Excellent to just get a kind of a summarization of what happens on these events. There really is a lot that goes into it. It's a team effort for sure. There's the speaker out front, I suppose, but there's lots and lots of people working to help support that effort with even last night to get some slides done at the last minute. And of course, all the brethren have just been fantastic everywhere that we've gone. They've been just charged up with energy and excitement. And I think trumpet readers that come into these events, they walk into the room and immediately feel that energy. And then it continues, especially when we have an earlier start like on the Sunday PACs. There's just more of an opportunity for people to stay after quite a while, which they did last night. And speaking of that and the feedback that we got, when we come back, we'll conclude today's program with a supersized montage from the Detroit PAC. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Trumpet Daily Radio Show. When the British government gave the Stone of Destiny back to Scotland in 1996, it captured media headlines around the world. But none of the reporting explained the God-inspired history of Britain's Stone of Destiny. This incredible true story is told in Herbert Armstrong's book, The United States and Britain in Prophecy. Nothing embodies the history and prophecy of the British peoples quite like Britain's Stone of Destiny, yet many have forgotten this vital history. Request The United States and Britain in Prophecy. Email your request to td@kpcg.fm. For more information, visit our website, thetrumpet.com. This is KPCG FM, and this is the Trumpet Daily.
Well, I'm from the Toledo, Ohio area. Actually, I thought he's great. I always like listening to Stephen Flurry. I'll listen to him online, and he fires you up. He has a way of speaking that gets to. Even I liked his writing in the Trumpet. One of some of his articles, I'll read them, and they just. Sometimes I think he's speaking to me. He's like, God, personally, it's like he knows I'm doing something. Sometimes because I get that kind of feeling from some of the stuff that I read. And I came through Mystery of the Age. It was like, wow. I thought I used to know something. Now I know how much I don't.
Yeah, I've been a subscriber for like 4 or 5 months now. I used to watch the Herbert Armstrong and fell away, and now started searching, and something's been driving me, so excited by it. And I just know this is just wonderful. It was a good show. It was a good introduction. It, didn't feel nervous or anything, and it's very exciting. So well presented, and you all did a great job.
I thought it was quite well and stuff like that. I've been reading a lot of their magazines and stuff for the last 10 years and stuff like that, and it's really helped me turn my life around dramatically.
I did go to the Columbus one from Dearborn, Michigan in last October, and then of course this one's really close, about a half hour away, and that made it easier on me. I've been with the Trumpet since I saw it in a doctor's office like in the mid-90s, and you were starting a court case of getting the rights to the materials, and I thought to myself, what fighters these guys are to go in a court and battle for it, and then have they gave up on them because God really worked that miracles in there. We didn't have to come up with the dough to get the pay for it, but we got the rights, and I love the material.
Yeah, I started in 2009, and I've been Catholic or was Catholic my whole life. I used to be the second in the pew there, and it just got monotonous. And so anyway, I read the Trumpet, and I've been hooked ever since. I just finished the Bible correspondence course, so I'm just talking to Victor about being a member, and I got a couple curveballs that I got to get out of my life, and I've been doing pretty good. I've been getting them out, but I'm looking to head to Brighton and start the church every Sabbath. I've been doing it on my own for several years now. So I've got, like I said, I just finished the Bible course. I'm reading everything and feeling better and better about it. So I'm fired up.
My name is Dave, and I've been a subscriber since the mid-'90s, and I took about 45 minutes to get here, and I'm definitely coming tomorrow night. I even took the day off tomorrow to make sure I got here with no conflict at all. And it's, the letter Mr. Stephen Fleury sent out about being a doer is striking a chord with me at this point, and getting a little older myself, so it's time to act on it a little more than read it. So.
I live near Port Huron, Michigan. Actually, it's Marine City, Michigan, and I've been reading the Philadelphia Trumpet for probably 20 years. And it's just a bastion of truth. If you want to know current events, what's going on, and how it ties in with end-time prophecy, it's a must-read. It's a must-read. If you really want to be informed, you need to read the Philadelphia Trumpet. And in this world, there's a lack of truth. Fake news has been around for a long time, and it's really a blessing from God that we have such a wonderful tool, a wonderful truth finder, if you will, in the Philadelphia Trumpet. And I highly encourage everybody to get it and read it.
Hello, my name is Mark Bordeaux. I'm very happy to be here. I missed the Columbus gathering a little while ago. I got here today, and it's a very exceptional experience because certain people like myself have been interested in these topics here that were covered today regarding prophecy and how it's unfolding in our end days. We are in the end days, and it's comforting to know that there are several other people that are here today, and we're all on the same page with this, and it's we're very interested in coming in again tomorrow and to further our education and to build our faith. It's a wonderful experience. I'm so happy to have these personal appearance campaigns available for everyone that wants to come in and listen.